discussing artificial neural networks. In the previous video, we defined deep learning as a subfield of machine learning that uses algorithms inspired by the structure and function of the brain's neural networks. As such, the models used in deep learning are called artificial neural networks. So put simply, artificial neural networks are computing systems that are inspired by the brain's neural networks. These networks are based on a collection of connected units called artificial neurons, or simply just neurons. Each connection between these neurons can transmit a signal from one neuron to another, and the receiving neuron then processes the signal and then signals downstream neurons connected to it. Typically, neurons are organized in layers. Different layers may perform different kinds of transformations on their inputs, and signals essentially travel from the first layer, called the input layer, to the last layer, called the output layer. Any layers between the input and output layers are called hidden layers. So now that we have the idea of the definition, let's just take a look at what one of these artificial neural networks may be illustrated as. I have another tab here opened in Google, and I just Googled images for artificial neural network, and here's one that I think does a pretty good job explaining what we just went over. So I said that the first layer would be called the input layer, so these would all be our inputs. They would then be transferred to a hidden layer here, and now this hidden layer has 4 different neurons. Each one of these nodes here illustrates a neuron, and them together within this column represent a layer. Since this layer is between the input and output layer, it is a hidden layer. And then from this hidden layer, these nodes transmit signals down to the nodes in the output layer. So now that we understand what an artificial neural network is and how it's depicted, let's see how we can build one. As mentioned when we went through the introduction of this entire playlist, I stated that I'll be using the neural network API called Keras, which is written in Python, to show code examples of the topics we cover here. So in Keras, we can build what is called a sequential model. Keras defines this sequential model as a linear stack of layers. And recall, we just mentioned that neurons are organized in layers, so that makes sense for a naming scheme. So this sequential model will be Keras' implementation of an artificial neural network. So let's have a look at how a very simple sequential model would be built in Keras. Assuming that you have Keras installed, you would first import sequential from keras.models, and then you would also need dense and activation from keras.layers, and we'll cover what these actually mean. So I'm creating a variable here called model. I'm setting it equal to an instance of a sequential object. Now within the constructor, I'm passing this array, and this array has 2 dense objects. Now these objects called dense are actually layers. Now dense is just a type of layer, and there are many different types of layers, and then later videos will cover more details about what exactly a dense layer is and what other types of layers there are. But for now, just understand that dense is the most basic type of layer within a neural network, and it connects each input to each output within the layer. So before moving forward, let's just flip back to our image here, and this layer here, this hidden layer, would be considered a dense layer, and that's because it's connecting all of its inputs here to each output node within the layer. So we have our model object set to an instance of sequential that's taken in an array of 2 dense layers, and within our dense layer, the first parameter that we're specifying, this 32 for example in our first layer, is the number of nodes or neurons within our layer. The second parameter, input shape here, is going to be the shape of our data that we're passing into our model. And then lastly, this activation function is something that we're going to talk about in more detail later, but for now you should just know that an activation function is typically a nonlinear function that follows a dense layer. The next layer here is also a dense layer. This time it only has 2 neurons, and it's using a different type of activation function. So one thing to note here is that we're showing this very basic model in Keras just to get started, but for more technical videos specifically on Keras, be sure to watch my Deep Learning with Keras playlist on my channel. So hopefully now you have an idea of what an artificial neural network is and how you can build one using Keras. And I hope you found this video helpful. If you did, please like the video, subscribe, suggest, and comment, and thanks for watching.